honestly, it took me so long to forgive myself for stopping. It took me so long to understand that I really chose me and I chose my marriage and I chose my financial health and I chose my mental health over this huge dream that I had. It took me years to forgive myself for that. If I can shorten that time for anyone who is questioning, how do I keep going? How do we afford it? How does my marriage sustain this? How do my other relationships sustain this? Because to your point in that elevator conversation, this impacts every aspect of our lives. It impacts us emotionally, it impacts us physically, it impacts us sexually, it impacts us, did I say financially? Because if I didn't, I'm going to mention it twice. All of it. And you are allowed to stop. You are allowed to say, this no longer serves me, and I'm going to start looking at my life in a different way.
Welcome to my fertility podcast, Superhumans,
a space for honest conversations, expert insights, and stories of resilience.
Whether you're just getting started on your fertility journey, facing challenges, or looking to educate yourself, you are in the right place.
We are Dr. Mavis Garcia
and Dr. Wise,
fertility specialists at Markham Fertility Center, located in Markham, Ontario, Canada.
Think of us as your biggest cheerleaders. Let's demystify the world of fertility together. On today's episode, we welcome Teri Hart. With over 30 years of broadcasting experience, Teri Hart is one of Canada's most recognized and sought-after media personalities, a multi-talented host, interviewer, critic, and producer, and now podcaster. Teri is the host, creator, and executive producer of The Heart of It All, a podcast about the realities of caregiving, which launched in 2025. Currently appearing as the face of Super Channel with Teri Hart's weekly Super Channel Super Picks and engaging IG Live interviews. Teri is also a frequent contributor to CBC's national radio show, Commotion with Elman Abdel Mahmoud. Teri was the face of the Movie Network for 19 years, the entertainment reporter for City News and Breakfast Television for 5 years, and has also appeared on CBC, The Morning Show, E-Talk, and The Social. Teri is a member in good standing of the Critics' Choice Association and volunteers her time with pioneering women in support of the Canadian Picture Pioneers. You can follow Teri on Instagram at Teri Hart, or her podcast at The Heart of It All Pod.
Welcome to the amazing Teri Hart. Teri, thank you so much for being here today. Let's start by hearing all about yourself, your story, your fertility journey, and how it is that the stars align that we are here today having this conversation.
Well, the stars have certainly aligned. It took us a while, but the alignment is in form now. My story is one that's kind of unique to the fertility community, I think. I've been a broadcaster for 30 years, primarily entertainment. I now do a podcast all about caregiving, which is a bit outside of the box, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll talk about that for sure.
My husband and I started trying to conceive when I was 34. We ended when I was just about 40. I had 5 miscarriages and did not end up with a baby. And through that process, everything I saw around fertility and infertility was that everybody ended up with a baby. I was like, I can't be the only one. I really can't. And so at the time I was working at City TV and I made a decision with the team at Cityline to go, and I'm putting this in quotes for anybody who's listening and not watching, but I decided to go public with my story. And for reference to everybody, I'm 54 years old now. So we're going back like 14 years to when I decided to talk about this publicly, and the floodgates were open. I mean, you guys as doctors in this world, you know this, but I think that there has always been this kind of idea that we only tell the happy stories. I think that we're getting better, but certainly back then, it was really important for me that other people saw that somebody else didn't end up with a baby too. And frankly, people still ask me now, like, you're 54 years old, you're still talking about fertility and infertility. But the fact is, I'm still 54 years old and I'm still child free, not by choice. So it's really important to me that people who are listening, not that it's a downer. I don't want anybody to have my story, but I do want people who have my story to not feel like they're the only ones and that is their unique failure, because it's not. The numbers are the numbers, but they are what they are. Not everybody ends up with a baby.
Absolutely. And thank you. It's such a powerful story to share because you're right. Every once in a while, we have patients that come to us and they say, has this ever happened? Like, I feel like I'm the only one. I don't see any space for me. So, this is really important that you're sharing that story and talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, you think about now with social media, whether it be Instagram or TikTok and even Facebook. I mean, there are communities and
Mhm.
women and couples can find communities. Back when I was going through it, it was really still a whisper network. The amount of how far we've pulled back the curtain. I mean, I see you guys now working with my dear friend Morgan Hoffman, who has frozen her eggs at 40 years old, and she's
Yeah.
public about that. It's wonderful to see all of this conversation about the real struggles. I mean, I've called it an epidemic, and I don't think it's short of that. The real struggles of fertility in the world right now.
And the struggle of fertility has so many different faces and so many different facets. And it's interesting. I ran into a patient in the elevator the other day, and she's like, thanks so much for doing the podcast. And she's like, I had no idea that there were so many different parts of fertility or the fertility journey. I didn't realize, I didn't think about it. And, I think you hit the nail on the head. This is Your story is often the one that is not talked about, and the one that I think a lot of patients probably avoid knowing or avoid hearing about for fear, I guess, I would imagine. I love that you're coming into this and you're saying, I don't want this on anybody. I don't want to be the Debbie Downer, right? But it's so important that these stories get out there. And this is why I think we love doing this podcast about bringing stories to the forefront so that people can hear, so that people can identify themselves in this and learn that they're not alone. And that, we're going to get into this obviously, but that what happens afterwards and where life goes from there. Cause I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, Dr. Wise, I think you bring up so many good points in that. It's not just that I don't want somebody to end up with my story. That's part of it. I also want people to understand that they can give themselves permission to stop. There's always
Oh, can
something.
you repeat that?
Oh,
I think that needs to be repeated.
honestly, it took me so long to forgive myself for stopping. It took me so long to understand that I really chose me, and I chose my marriage, and I chose my financial health, and I chose my mental health over this huge dream that I had. It took me years to forgive myself for that. If I can shorten that time for anyone who is questioning, how do I keep going? How do we afford it? How does my marriage sustain this? How do my other relationships sustain this? Because to your point in that elevator conversation, this impacts every aspect of our lives. It impacts us emotionally, it impacts us physically, it impacts us sexually, it impacts us, did I say financially? Because if I didn't, I'm going to mention it twice. All of it. And you are allowed to stop. You are allowed to say, this no longer serves me, and I'm going to start looking at my life in a different way. Maybe it's a different way than you had dreamed from the time you could conceive of your life as an adult. But you are allowed to start thinking of your life differently, and you are not a failure and you're not a bad person. Sometimes you have to make different decisions. It's not just about not ending up with a baby, it's about actually having a conversation with yourself, your spouse, your family, whatever your support network looks like, about stopping and about looking at your life differently, because you guys know there's always another protocol. There's always another option. And your jobs, you are doctors, you are endocrinologists, you are problem solvers. It is impossible for you to not offer up those suggestions to people, those real options. I would love, and I'm sure you do because Dr. Garcia, I've met you and you have an incredible amount of empathy, but I hope that in fertility clinics from coast to coast to coast, people also are offering up the option of stopping.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for about 15 years, but I think it's through experience, through meeting people like you and having these conversations that I now would say is part of that conversation when it gets to the point of, donor eggs, donor sperm, surrogate, or whatnot. It's always like, these are all the options. And another option can also be stopping and looking at your life and know that your life is valuable and worth it no matter what, and all of those things. So that's, I would say, probably over the last few years, thanks to people like you and other patients that have brought it up, that I now make it part of the conversation. I think it's powerful. I think it's important. And I think people need to know that that's an option on the table.
Yeah, and we see it in other areas of medicine too. It's not just fertility. We're so blessed and so lucky to live in a time where we have all these medical options, whether it be for disease, whether it be for fertility, whatever it is. I often use the phrase just because we can doesn't mean we should. Again, don't get me wrong. I am 100% in support of absolute intervention. Here as a person who did everything. I did every acupuncture. I did every, Asian tea concoction. I did it all. And this is still me. I had to come to a realization and, my last miscarriage, I was into my second trimester. It was a little bit more complicated and I was in hospital and I ended up getting sepsis from the IV.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so after that experience, my husband was just like, I can't see you do this anymore. I can't see you experience all the trauma. You could see the hole in my arm from the consistent, giving of blood. It's an all-consuming experience. I think that I was really lucky. I was able to hear him say that to me, and I didn't feel like it was an assassination of my character. But I came to the point of using that Turner phrase of just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Mhm.
And that really helped propel me forward to make one of the most difficult decisions of my life. I sit here with you not suggesting that this was easy,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
but it was the right thing.
Yeah. Because
And for the record, my life is good. Like I have a really,
oh,
really
I see it.
I have a really, really full,
Yeah.
lovely, gorgeous, exciting, challenging, love-filled life.
Mhm. There is light at the end of the tunnel.
Happiness is gonna look one way, and then you just have to build it in a different way. It's still happiness. It's just what kind of blocks do you use to do that? What are the materials and the resources and the people that you put in your life to feel it? And then at the end of the day, happiness, it comes from the inside. It's not from the things, it comes from the
Yeah.
inside. And I realize also it's not a simple thing, right? Like you were saying, it takes you years to do that. But do you think the decision to stop, like to say this is enough, and now it's going to take me years to be okay, but the decision is made? Or do you think that the decision was kind of like a whisper that came over time?
I would say I didn't even ever consider stopping in full honesty until that last 6 or 8 months where I was, close to 40. We'd been in it for so long. The financial constraint was really difficult. We'd gone down the adoption road and learned a ton. And, my husband's quite a bit older than I am. And we went to all the adoption classes, and there are these wonderful young people who are in their early 30s and she had lost her ovaries to cancer, or this wonderful gay couple who had all the support and all the family and whatever. And it's like, I'd give my baby to them over me. you know, I understood where we fell in the chain of the adoption process in terms of getting a baby. We went down the children's CAS chain and I thought we're really open to a lot of things. And the reality was we were waiting for at least 5 years and probably a child who had profound, profound trauma. And that was a challenging thing to wrap our heads around. At the time, we looked into international adoption. China was closed down, Russia was closed down. And also we're looking at really, really a huge expense. Unfortunately, adoption can be treated very much like income for places, and certainly in the United States, and certainly interprovincially here in Canada as well. But, we were close to a baby boy in Florida, but I would have, or one of us would have had to live there for 6 months. We couldn't quite figure out just the logistics of how that would work because we do have other responsibilities in our life. So we went down the egg donor route, and the clinic was shut down 3 days before my transfer.
Oh my goodness.
I think that when that happened, and that's a terrible story. I'm sure you're familiar with the story and the clinic that happened with, the Leah Picard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was 3 days from transfer, and at that point, you're calling every day, and I called that morning, and it was like nobody answered, and the mailbox was full, and I was like, "What is happening? What?" Couldn't get through, couldn't get through, and then we found out that the RCMP had shut down the clinic and everything was gone. This is a very long answer to your question, but I think that was the moment that I lost my mind, and I was like, "I'm not a woo-woo-y person, I'm a science and facts person." But I was like, "Maybe the universe is telling me something. Maybe we're at the end." That was a profound, difficult part of our experience. I don't like to use the word journey. Journey sounds fun, and there was so much of this experience that was not fun. So I use the word experience. Language matters to me. So when that happened, I started to really think that I was done. I didn't know how much more I could take emotionally. And then when the sepsis happened after that, I was just like, it's everything. Like this just doesn't, it's not, nothing's working, you know?
Right. Right. Right.
How do you move from that place? Like, where do you go next when you hit, dare I say, it sounds like kind of like rock bottom almost, or when you make that conclusion? Like, who do you turn to? Where do you go? And how do you rebuild from there?
It's a great question, and you're right to say rock bottom because it certainly felt that way. And just to kind of fill out the picture a little bit, I, at the time, was working at the movie network, which is now Crave. I was traveling the world interviewing movie stars. Like, my life was good. My life was exciting. But I was struggling to a point that I didn't know how I was going to move forward.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what my life could look like. Becoming a mom was so obvious to me. I mentioned that my husband's older than I am. When we made the decision to build a life together, it was a line in the sand for me. Like, I'm going to have a child. He has a child from a previous relationship, Alex, who's a delight. She's like 10 years younger than I am. This was really for me, what am I then if I'm not that? And, the world doesn't treat childless women very well.
Mhm.
The world treats childless women like there's a presumption of selfishness, or there's a presumption of, oh, you wanted to focus on your career. Like, there's all these presumptions. I mean, I'm 54 years old, and it's still the first question. Oh, do you have kids? My husband has never asked that. He's just not. And so our value as women is somehow tied to our fertility. And I had to disassociate that. I had to unpack what that was saying about the world, not me. Because I know my story. I know who I am. I know what I've done. And I know what it all felt like. Unpacking that structure was key. Owning this story and talking about it publicly was really healing for me. It wouldn't be for everybody. Very few people knew. Our nearest and dearest and our family members knew what we were going through, but people didn't know. I was not speaking about this publicly at all. Again, a long time ago, people weren't talking about this. It was just like, oh, baby. So talking about it publicly, and then, holding some accountability to places like Fertility Matters Canada, who I love. This is going back years and years and years. And I just commented on one of their posts something about, not everybody ends up with a baby. And the woman who runs that organization DM'd me immediately and was like, "I'm so sorry. And do you feel like we're missing that part of the equation?" I said, "Oh, yeah, you missed that part of the equation. I love what you do. I think you do amazing things." And frankly, they now include these stories regularly in what they talk about. And I host events for them and I show up for them still to this day. Dr. Garcia has seen this. People come up to me with tears and say, I'm thinking of stopping, or I don't know what question to ask myself. That's when I feel like maybe this was what I was meant to be doing with my care and love and affection. Maybe I'm spreading it elsewhere instead of being a mom. 15 years later, that's kind of where I'm at in answering that question, Dr. Weiss.
Mhm. That's beautiful. It's incredible that you have sort of channeled that energy into working with Fertility Matters Canada and into working with people. And so I'm curious, when people do come up to you and they say, I'm thinking of stopping or I decided to stop, what do you say to them?
The first question I asked is, what's your support system like? Because I really, really want to know from them, do they have support of a partner? Do they have support of family? There's a lot of people who go through this experience feeling very alone
Mhm.
without support. And that is a first line of questioning for me is what is their support like? And then it really is an organic conversation. It really is. I offer up things that I've done in my life that have allowed me to move forward in this, from really being involved in friends of mine's kids' lives. My stepdaughter now has a daughter, so I have a granddaughter, which is a unique situation. And I do recognize that families are made in very different ways. But you can have the relationship of children in your life if you choose to. And sometimes I'll say it also, that includes a lot of the good and minimizes some of the challenges of parenting, correct?
For sure.
Not to be Pollyanna about it, but it can. You can get
Yeah.
all the good and less of the challenges. But mostly I say to them that think about all of the ways your life is different than what you imagined. This will, if you stop and you are child free not by choice, this will be one of those things. It won't always be the only thing you're thinking about. Your life will move on. You will find joy, and you will get a huge part of your brain and your body and your bank account and all of the things that this is affecting. You will get a huge part of that back, and you can restructure. I mean, to use Dr. Garcia's terminology, what makes up the house, like those building blocks, you reshape them. We do it in all kinds of different ways. There are very few adults who are like, my life looks exactly what I thought it was going to look like when I was 17 years old and I'm now 45.
Yeah. Whether you have children or not. Exactly.
In every aspect of life, 100%.
Every aspect. So this can be just like those. And you will be sad.
That's what I wanted to ask you. I wanted to get there because a lot of times when I'm having that conversation with people, and of course I'm having it when it's raw and in the moment, like you 40 years ago, I'm not having these conversations to Teri Hart at 54, like you're mentioning. So of course it's a very raw time because these are actively my patients who are actively at the point, the most painful point, if you think about it, of stopping and going there. But they tell me, what if I regret it in 10 years? What if I'm older and now I really can't do it because of all the things, but I have a lot of regret? So I think a lot of people worry about a life that is sad and full of regret. And I want you to tell them that that's not the case, as you've mentioned it. But also, I could imagine that you're not. And we had another conversation with Blooming with Care, which is somebody else that we had on the podcast who also was child free not by choice. And like you're saying, there are moments of sadness. And I want people to know that you can be okay with little tiny blips in there where you might be thinking about that child that you didn't have, where you might be having a little bit of regret, but that doesn't take away from the big picture of the full life that you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I think you said it beautifully. One of the things that I'm so aware of once I got out of the hamster wheel of fertility treatment, because for me, it felt very much like a hamster wheel, is that it's all encompassing. It's not even every 28 days. It really is every 14 days when you're building up and then you're hoping and then you just start doing it again. So if you don't need to take a break from your cycles. So that's a lot. That's a lot of focus on one thing. You're also all of the other things that I talked about. Many, many people are also doing acupuncture, doing Chinese medicine. They're availing themselves to anything that not only their doctors, but also the internet is suggesting to them. Like I was taking CoQ10 by the handfuls. And all of that space that is focused on this one thing gets free. You can fill it with other things that bring you joy, whether it be pickleball, knitting, going to the movies, having a tea with your best friend, going and volunteering at the hospital or the food bank, whatever. You can find things that float your boat that you didn't have space for. And so it is about freeing up space for joy in a way that this hamster wheel, that space is with doing at the hope, at the anticipation of joy with no guarantee. When and if you make the decision to stop, you've got all this space to find joy, to fill it up with things. And yes, it's not your own child, but joy comes in all kinds of places.
This reminds me of a story. I had a patient many years ago who came to see me. She saw me once. She was a little bit older, maybe 42, and I went through all the stats and all the numbers and all the things. And she's like, "Great, thank you very much. I'm not going to do anything. Like, this is not for me." And that was it. There was one meeting, but this woman went and traveled the world and sent me a postcard from every city she visited. And she would write on the postcard, "I am free." Like she would tell me, "I'm enjoying this and that and the Eiffel Tower." And she's, "Thank you so much. I am free." I'll never forget that. She had one visit with me, but just knowing the information and knowing all the things, she was just in that one appointment, made that decision so powerful and so meaningful, even though it was a one-time interaction.
But I will also suggest that it was probably years before she was like, I'm going to make that appointment. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to find it. I'm going to do my due diligence, what it could require of me to become a parent. So she'd probably done a lot of internal work. And it was probably really nervous making for her to walk through that office because she probably had her pros and cons list. If this doctor tells me this looks good and this could be the case, or if this doctor tells me this, then this is my option. And listen, I love the fact so much as a woman that women have options that they've never had in history before around their fertility. Go explore all the options. Let me also suggest that one of those options is also being child-free.
As a fertility doctor, of course, our job is to people babies. But in my mind, I think what I want is to give people endings or stories, and even a child free is still a happy ending. Like that patient that sent me those cards, other patients that I've been in touch with over the years, you were not my patient, but those stories, they stay with me as much as the stories that end up with babies, because at the end of the day, it's still somebody that came to us with a problem. And whether it is like this patient, when I gave just a little bit of information and didn't have a whole experience or not, it's still a happy ending. It's so special for me to still be part of those stories, even if they didn't end up the way that we just started in the beginning.
It's also incredibly brave, right? This is a strange thing, but one of the things that I miss from the experience, those 6 years, is sitting in the waiting room, which for many people is the worst part of it all. But I used to love sitting in the waiting room and looking around at all the other patients who were at some similar place that I was and thinking like, how brave are you? And where are you hiding your needles when you're at work? And what are you telling people about the bruises? How are you managing all this? And I thought all of the like shenanigans that all of these women are going through to have a baby. So I miss that. I got so much strength in that room, sitting and looking at the other people. Oh, I loved them so much. Without them knowing it, I loved them so much. The fact that the other thing that the experience gave me, to jump on that, it's not just sad.
I mean,
There is not a day in my life that I don't look at another human being and think to myself, we are all walking miracles.
Yes,
Walking
absolutely.
miracles. And I would not have had that perspective. I would not have that appreciation if I hadn't experienced the loss and the rebuilding of what my life was going to look like from my fertility experience. Dr.
I
Wise is all like, but I do legitimately mean this, you know?
No, it's incredible. I want advice from you, right? I want to learn to be a better fertility I always want to be a better fertility doctor every day. So I want to ask you this. When I'm seeing patients, it's this incredible balancing act, right? Between trying to provide hope, to be the cheerleader, right? And to be somebody's strength, to be their power, to be like, you can do this, you've got this. But it also to sort of talk about this potential of, things may not work out, to sort of start introducing that idea and trying to find the balance between these things is really tough and something that I struggle with. And so what I try and do is to bring up this concept of not doing fertility treatment sooner rather than later to normalize it. Like, yeah, this is just like another option. This is just like a part of the conversation. You can do X, Y, Z, or you cannot. But it's so hard in the short encounters that we have with patients to provide that hope, to be that cheerleader that I want to be, because, you're right. As physicians, we still have hope. We still always hope
Sure.
that the next protocol is going to be the one.
Absolutely.
And there's never a moment where it's like, okay, like zero, like done. Dr. Christine and I, we're always brainstorming, okay, if we do this and this and this, and we change this, we add this and all this, and come up with these concoctions,
Mhm.
for lack of a better word.
They are
How
concoctions.
how to balance these things? How do you explore this with people, being sensitive to where they're at in that moment, and to try and do this very quickly, right? In our short encounters that we have with patients.
So I would suggest this because I think the most important thing is that, and you guys know this, but everybody is different. Every person
Mhm.
walking through your doors is different. So I don't think it's a one size fits all thing. What I would have liked, and maybe this has changed with time, but is that somebody had have asked me, do you know what the odds are? I believe in the positive because that's my job. But do you know what the odds are? And do you imagine what your life would look like if you're on this side of the odds? I am a fertility doctor. My
Yeah.
job is XYZ. I'm always going to have hope. But my responsibility to you as a patient is that you are also looking at this realistically. And you can't make anybody go like, oh, yes, but you definitely can make them aware that those odds aren't made up numbers. Those odds are human beings.
Yeah.
Those odds are people who ended up with a baby and people who did not. And so I think that asking that question, which maybe opens up something in somebody's consciousness about that reality, might be a way, Dr. Wise.
Mhm.
Like, and I think that what you just said is really truthful. Like, I'm always going to be the cheerleader. That being said, there's a reality to this that unfortunately could be infinite, but for you as a person, should be finite.
Yeah, it's always 1 or 0. It either works or it doesn't.
Yeah. There's no gray
Yeah.
area. There's no kind of
Yeah.
pregnant. So, yeah, I think that asking those questions to patients about what they actually know makes you a better doctor. People don't know.
You're absolutely correct. I actually really love this. This is something I'm going to change in my practice going forward, to be honest, because I think we spend so much time talking and saying the odds of success are X%. But it does sometimes feel like we say the thing, but people might not hear the thing or kind of internalize it. But
I didn't.
asking the question,
I didn't. I remember I was
yeah.
like, blah, 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 get me pregnant.
Or like, even if we say the odds of success are 10%, people are like, well, yeah, but I'm going to be at the 10%. You make a really good point that framing it as a question and having somebody actually say it back to you, you really get a much deeper understanding of where their brains are at. And hopefully they can appreciate the reality, right? Because we can have hope, but we also have to be realistic. I always tell people, I will support you 110% in whatever you choose to do, but I want you to go into this with eyes wide open.
100%. And I do think like what you learn in, marriage counseling or whatever, like say that back to me. You
Yeah.
know? Like you really hear this? You're picking up what I'm throwing down? I think truth is as empowering as hope. And I think that there's a lot of blind faith. Let's be honest. You kind of have to have blind faith once you're at that point. You really do. And that's a wonderful thing. God bless naivete. It gets us through so many things. That being said, I've talked to so many people, like even people I talk to at Fertility Matters Canada events and stuff, and they're like, well, I just didn't know. I empathize, but I also think that there is a part of people who don't want to know that. And you have to, I mean, this is speaking from me and what worked for me as a person. Knowledge is power, and it's going to shortcut your appointments. It's going to shortcut your protocol. Protocol has changed so much since my time. But do they still do like the first run of like just a pill to try and what's that medication called?
Back in the day, we used to use a lot of Clomid.
Clomid, that's what I had. I
Yeah.
had Clomid. If you're in your mid-30s and you're doing a round of Clomid or whatever the equivalent is now, and you still get one egg, guys, have the conversation and jump to injectables and don't do an IUI if you produce enough follicles. Like, just don't do it. That would be, I'm not a doctor, but I get frustrated sometimes talking to people because they're like, well, and then we did this baby step, and then we did this baby step, and then we did this baby step. I'm like, and then you wasted 18 months. 18 months is a lot of time from 36 to 38.
Yeah. Although I will say, along those lines of success, a lot of patients will also come into a fertility clinic and say, I want to conceive naturally.
Yeah.
I'm here and I've been trying for a year, but I want to get pregnant naturally. And I'm like, okay, I get that. I understand that. And I would venture to say like 99.9% of fertility patients or people 7 years old want to get pregnant, quote unquote, naturally. But that's not the question,
No.
right? Sometimes. And it's really about also trying to reframe that kind of frame of reference so that people are ready to move into the next thing.
I just want to also say that those scenarios that I just put forward, they are scenarios that I went through because I was the person who was like, I don't want to jump to that. I don't want to. My doctor was like, I think blah, blah, blah. And to be completely transparent about my situation, I never produced enough follicles to ever get to an IVF. I was just like sluggish and it never worked. I did really well on Clomid, but then I would have no lining, like zero. So I had like, we could never teeter-totter it enough to get the advantage of the drugs for follicles, but not sacrifice a lining situation. I mean, I'm really, really not being critical of fertility doctors. And I think that a lot of people do go into these scenarios being like, oh, I'm just going to need a little. It's the same thing of like, I'm going to be the 10%, or I'm just going to need a little.
Yeah.
Thing. And I guess we do need that blissful ignorance, don't we?
Oh, for sure. I think you hit the needle on the head there where you said that we are all walking miracles. And we, like the three of us, know that and we recognize that. We feel that very deeply for our own personal experiences and experiences that, Dr. Garcia and I have gone through professionally as well. But to everyone else, I mean, you walk out of high school and you're like, oh my God, I have to do everything not to get pregnant. Oh my God, if he looks at me funny, I'm going to get pregnant.
Yep.
I mean, I would venture to say that was probably the main message that we all got out of sex ed back in high school, right? And you carry that through a lot and you don't realize unless you go through the fertility experience of just how insane it is that any of us are here.
It's insane.
Yeah.
What do you mean? They meet and then they multiply and then they multiply and then it just keeps going until it's a thing. Like, what do you mean? I'm a relatively intelligent person. I'm a relatively educated person. How did I not know that? I'm an action-driven person. Dr. Garcia was with me when we did a big event at the Empire Club on fertility, and they'd never, ever had the word fertility in 120 years. It's huge. And, one of the things that I'm so passionate about is having fertility treatments be included in benefits at companies. Like, this is an epidemic. One of the things I said on that panel, there's no reason you should remember Dr. Garcia, but one of the things I said is the Empire Club, it attracts big business and lots of Bay Street folks and, very suit and tie crowd. And I said, everybody sitting at your table, look at the women sitting at your table. They have probably gone and injected themselves with a fertility medication in your staff washroom. We heard this like gasp and titter and a couple of applauses because people were like, uh-huh. And you don't know. Like, this is happening at workplaces. So one thing I would love to see companies, corporations, and insurance companies work together to actually help battle this epidemic and create families. Number one. And number two, sex education, health in high schools needs to change. We need to
Yes.
start educating boys and girls about their fertility, about what that is, about what age matters, about what could be indications, about behaviors, about all kinds of things that can impact your fertility. And you're not going to care about it when you're 16, the same way you don't care about a whole lot of stuff in high school. But when you're 34, you'll at least have a point of reference and not be starting at ground zero, or, Dr. Wise, to your point, at like a negative, thinking I'm just going to get pregnant because I get my period every 28 days. You guys are like, oh my God, Teri Hart, stop.
No. This is phenomenal. It's very interesting what you said, sort of around the perception of people and what it means for a woman not to have a child, not to be a mother, and sort of what all those connotations are and all those preconceived notions that people have around that. And it reminded me of something that happened actually just recently in my own household around the Christmas holidays. And we were having this discussion, actually. I'm coming from the field of fertility, where having children, being a mother, is not an obvious thing, right? It doesn't mean that everyone just becomes a mother because they want to be, right? That's obviously how I'm coming into this. And one of our older relatives said, well, not having children, that's selfish and all that. But they also brought up this concept of legacy, that if you don't have children, if you're not bringing children, like, what are you doing it all for? What is the legacy that you're leaving? Like, you don't have a legacy if there are no kids. So how do you answer that question? Or what would you say to that in terms of legacy, which, to be honest, not something I ever really thought about. It's more sort of, it was very important to this particular person.
Well, I will say that was another reshaping for me when I went through this reshaping of some notion of like, what's my family going to look like? Who's going to take care of me when I'm older? P.S. By the way, there's no guarantee your children are going to do that. I think that for me, legacy, and when it became really clear to me about legacy, and really what that person is talking about is death, right? And I lost my dad August 1st of 2024.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry to hear
Thank
that.
you. Thank you. And it was really, really painful experience, very close to both my parents, and losing my dad was hard. And when I was writing his eulogy, his life had nothing to do with me. His life was his life. And he lived an amazing life. One aspect of his life was being my dad and me being his daughter, but there was so much else to him. And he was so important to the world outside of me. And I think that that experience became really, really obvious to me about who you can be, who you are outside of your role as parent. And frankly, I think that that is one of the most dangerous things that parents can do, which is only identifying themselves as that role and only thinking that that is what makes them important and that is what matters, because they are giving themselves short shrift. Your life exists in so many other capacities outside of your role as a parent. I get that it's all consuming. I get that it's a huge, important job, but you do exist outside of that. Just like the millions of people who don't have. I have this thing of like when somebody dies, there's often a first question that people ask, oh, did they have children? Like somehow that makes their life more important. Maybe I'm putting that on the question because that's my baggage.
No, you're right. That is actually like a very, very common thing that people ask right after. You're absolutely right. I never thought about that.
Yeah, and it's like, well, that doesn't make them more important.
Mhm.
It doesn't make more people going to miss them or less people going to miss them depending on who they were when they were here. I think for sure, if you don't have children, there are things that you have to look at in terms of your life that people with children maybe take for granted because it's not
Mhm.
a guarantee. They take it for granted. But there's also that question of like, some things happen to people, like infertility, that is not anything they did or didn't do. The legacy question is like, I don't know, maybe things do end with me, but that isn't anything that I did or didn't do. And I'm
Mhm.
still going to live my life that I'm here trying to spread the values and the importance of the things that do matter to me to as many people as I can. And that I think is my legacy.
That's a good point, Martin. I never thought about it, but as you're talking, Terry, I'm thinking about all the lives that we touch on a daily basis, and all the lives that touch me that are not necessarily my children. Like all the patients I have met, all the people, all the experiences. Your life is your legacy. It's not the children, it's your life, the life that you lived and the impact that you made and the connections that you made and the people that you interacted with in one way or another. Like that patient I told you that sent me a postcard. I mean, I'm her legacy in a way. Like she touched me very deeply. So it's really like you're leaving a legacy right here in this podcast, in this very moment. Like this podcast is going to exist.
And all the advocacy work. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we get really, really obsessed, especially women, especially towards women, about
Mhm.
that one role. And I think
Mhm.
it's done damage. And I think that we are a generation that now has choice around fertility that never existed before, certainly not before the invention of the birth control pill. And certainly after that, around the perception of just what you did in life. There's all kinds of
Mhm.
choice for women that never existed before, from medical advances to our own autonomy, our own bodily autonomy. These are all really, really wonderful things. I hope we can continue to move the conversation forward in terms of women shouldn't be undervalued based on whether they're having children or not.
I really think that legacy, it is what you make of it, simply, right? It is what you make of it. If you want to build a legacy in a specific way, you can still do that. Absolutely. Apart from having children, whether you have children or not, whether it's professionally and the lives you touch that way or through volunteer work, as you mentioned before, through advocacy work, which you are making a huge legacy doing that, right? And at the same time, this question of legacy, I don't know, from my perspective, this is a thing that like you're dead when it's there.
Yeah.
I don't know if I really care about my legacy so much because I'm going to be gone.
There's
I just want to live my life in the way that I want to the fullest that I can. And I want to help people, touch people's lives. And from that, the legacy will come. But I don't live my life so that I have a really great eulogy when I'm dead, if that makes sense.
totally. There's a really great documentary, a two-part documentary that Ben Stiller made about Mel Brooks called Mel Brooks, the 99-year-old man. And it goes into detail about he had this deep, deep friendship with Carl Reiner, who was Rob Reiner's father. And they, up until Carl Reiner died, this is Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner. These are two giants of comedy. These are two men who had unbelievable success and fame and everything. And, Mel Brooks is now 99. Carl Reiner died, I don't know, a while ago now. I don't have it in my gray matter right now, but they were best friends. And Mel Brooks would go over to Carl Reiner's house every day and they would eat basically TV dinners on TV trays and watch Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy. And Jerry Seinfeld said in this documentary, he said, it just made me think that no matter how much we have in our years and or whatever, at a certain point, you end up eating dinner with your best friend watching Jeopardy.
Should we all be so lucky?
Should we
Yeah.
all be so lucky?
Lucky.
You
Yeah.
know? And I
Yeah.
and that sticks with me in terms of legacy, in terms of all the things that we think are so important. And so those last years of our lives get smaller and we just are with the people who we love and who love us. That's beautiful to me.
And whether we have children or no, legacy is not under our control, right? Like we're gone, and then people are going to remember us the way that they want to remember us, and we have no control over that. And then that's just one generation. After the next generation, nobody might even remember at all, right? Like, but it's speaking of legacy and it's speaking of living an amazing, rich life. Let's talk about your podcast.
Yes,
Talk about
now
it.
this
So
is my baby.
yeah. That's right. So tell me what led to this podcast. How is it going from one podcaster to another?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a heavy lift. You guys know podcasting is no joke. For the record, you don't just set up a mic and do it. It takes a lot. So,
Yep.
the podcast, which is called The Heart of It All, my last name, Hart, The Heart of It All, it came from the experience of when my dad got sick. My dad had a few strokes. He had some vascular dementia. That happened the end of 2023. And then he died, as I mentioned earlier. He died August 1st of 2024. And in that experience, my mom's a retired nurse, very, very capable person. I was secondary caregiver, helping her as much as I could. And in the whole experience, I was like, this is so hard. And he was really high functioning. He was great. But why is this so hard? Why is it so hard for me to find this information? Why is it so hard for me to know what the next step is? And then when he died, seeing what was being asked of my mom as recent widow of her spouse of 56 years had just died, and she was almost 80 years old, and them asking her to take a picture of every page of his will, electronically sign it, zip the file and send it to them. Like, no, she can't do that. That is beyond her capabilities as a really, really intelligent person. So I just thought, this is something that majority of us are gonna go through. Majority of us are going to be in a caregiving role at some point in our lives. By the way, that's if we're lucky, because if we're not in a caregiving role, that means we don't have seniors in our life, and we don't want that. We want seniors in our life. You know, we are living longer. We are a society that has never lived longer. That comes with consequence. It doesn't come with no consequence. So most people are going to need caregiving. Most of us are gonna be in a caregiving role, and we're doing a terrible job of talking about it. People are afraid of getting old, people are afraid of losing capacity, people are afraid of decline, and there's a lot of things that we shouldn't be afraid of. There are a lot of things that we can talk about and make preparation for and be aware that are going to happen. I'm loving the conversations that I'm having week in and week out. I'm learning so much, and it's a bottomless pit of conversations to have, of topics to discuss. It's really and truthfully the most important thing I've ever done in my life, is have these conversations and bring this information to people.
And it's interesting that you said it's hard because I mean, somebody like you who has been in broadcasting and TV and all of those things, I would think she can do a podcast like I make lunch.
Well,
Basically.
Dr. Garcia, the time is still the time, and you still have to book those guests, and you still have to do the research, and you still have to edit them, and then you have to feed all of these platforms from YouTube to Instagram to,
Yeah.
and they all have different aspect ratio deliverables. Like, it is mind-boggling.
Mhm.
And you can do it at all different levels. Like, if somebody just wants to set up a microphone and do it, have at it, go, do it. Discoverability is hard, right? It's a very crowded marketplace.
Mhm.
And so sometimes it feels like we're pushing jello uphill. And then
Mhm.
other
Yeah.
times, out of nowhere, I'll look and we'll have a great day of downloads and we'll realize that we got mentioned in something. Or what I honestly believe is that there are two things. What are the three things that we didn't talk about in my lifetime until recently? Fertility, menopause, and caregiving. What do
Mhm.
they have in common? They're all women's issues.
Women. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You wanna know why we're talking about them now? Because social media has given women a voice that we've never seen in history before. So this is what I honestly believe, and obviously I've been affected by all three of those issues. That's number 1. And number 2, I just think that as much as fertility is an epidemic, I also think that caregiving is going to be the issue of our time.
Mhm.
Yes.
And we need to prepare people. And my very, very lofty goal for this podcast is that we're creating a resource for people through our website that they can be like, oh, I need, and they can go to the heartofitallpodcast.ca and they can be like, I didn't know you could rent hospital beds or commodes from the Red Cross. That's what I need. Go and get it. So we're slowly but surely building up a resource for people, and we're going to keep on going.
Yeah, and that's a resource that doesn't exist, right?
Yeah. And especially something from a Canadian perspective too, right? Because again, we get so much from American media and what they're doing in the States that same thing in the world of fertility, just because it's happening in the States or it's happening in America doesn't mean it's happening in Canada, right? Dr. Garcia and I were fertility doctors. We don't really deal with caregiving sort of at later stages of life on a professional level, but we saw a lot of it in our training and through medical school. And of course, we also have our own personal experiences too that we've gone through in our own personal lives. And let me tell you, just because we're doctors doesn't mean that we're any smarter.
Honestly,
Okay.
Dr. Wise, I just had a family doctor, a GP on, Dr. Laraya, and she said, I am a general physician. I am a mother. She's also a caregiver to her two parents. She said nothing prepared me for caregiving.
Yeah.
It is a completely different beast of time, emotion, all of it. And that is why we're doing this podcast.
And it's another huge area that is underserviced, let's say, or where there's just so little information. And you have to be so savvy to be able to navigate what's out there and to be able to figure out what their resources are. I think many people also like infertility. They think, okay, I'm going to get referred to a fertility clinic. I'm going to show up and like they're just going to tell me what to do and like it's going to work and like it's all going to be good. And it's the same thing with caregiving, the later years of life or people who are very, very ill, even when they're younger. They think, okay, well, the doctors and like the care team at the hospital, they're just going to make it happen. It's just going to like work somehow. But that is absolutely not the case.
Yeah.
And so that is really important work that you're doing for sure.
We had a wonderful geriatrician on, Dr. Amina Jabbar, and I said to her, what is the common misnomer about geriatric medicine? And she said, I think people come to me often and they think that I have a pill that's going to fix the fact that their 85-year-old mother is experiencing dementia. And it's like every single one of us will probably get dementia if we live long enough. It is a disease of the elderly. It is a shrinking of the brain. And it happens. I mean, the numbers are after the age of 70, 1 in 4 people experience dementia. After the age of 80, 1 in 3. After the age of 90, 1 in 2. And those numbers pan out. And so what are we doing in society as many, many people are living into their 90s physically well? Because we can cure cancers now. We live a more healthful life. Our lifespans are being extended physically. But what are we doing for the millions of people? Like 770,000 people in this country are living with Alzheimer's, which is the most common form of dementia. By 2030, that's going to be over 1 million people just with Alzheimer's, not counting vascular dementia, frontal temporal dementia. So we're talking about a huge segment of the population that needs care, and we need to understand what their lives look like.
It's going to be a big part of your legacy. And I love that.
Talk about legacy. My goodness. So I'm thinking right now about a few weeks ago, I had this conversation with a patient who is considering stopping. And she said, I don't know how to do that. So tell me, what would you want people to know? People in the middle of their journey, people who are considering stopping, people who are looking at those people that are in their journey considering stopping. What would you want them to know about life after infertility when you don't end up with a baby?
It takes time, just like it took time when I was in it to realize I was in it. It's the opposite side of that. So it took time. I did allow myself to be sad. I was really sad and I was pretty lost, but that fog lifts. And then I realized that I did have different options and I needed to explore those options. And it is important to note that when we first stopped, I didn't think I was stopping for good. My husband was just very much like, okay, I had to take a break because I had a miscarriage, but he's like, we're not jumping back in your first like medically permissible cycle. And I was like, okay. And then, when I let that go, when I got out of that hamster wheel, then I was like, okay, I'm going to give it another month. And that led to me going, I'm starting to feel a little bit better. And this actually feels a little bit freeing. But it does take time. Give yourself time. Give yourself all kinds of grace. There's lots of conversation out there about, should I go to baby showers? How do I feel about my friends who are having kids? And how should friends treat you and all the rest of it? That is so individual. And frankly, for me, it could change on a dime. One day I'd be like, give me all the babies. I want to love all the babies. And then I was like, I can't be around anybody who's ovulating. I ran the spectrum. So I wish I could give an easy answer, Dr. Garcia. What this is all leading to is it's complicated. It's a complicated decision. You've also probably been jacked up on hormones for a long period of time. It takes a while for that to leave your body. It does have an impact. And I think that that needs to be discussed more as well. But life is all kinds of wonderful when you feel like you have a little bit of control again. I was so fundamentally out of control of every aspect of my life because of my fertility experience that what I got back from stopping was a control that meant so much to me in terms of my mental health and even my physical health.
That's a good answer. And I think for anybody who is considering this, and I always tell patients this, the words that I use is I want you to know that you're enough and that you're worth it, with or without children. Because I think, like you mentioned this, for women, our worth is so tied to our fertility, our ability to have children. Like doing that on time takes it takes something. It takes time and it takes work and it takes a lot because the messaging is constant. It's there all the time. Like I said, there is people like you, there's Blooming with Care who interview, there's so many other patients that I have met. And I do believe that everybody is worth it and capable of a big, beautiful, rich, wonderful life, even if they don't have the children that they were hoping to in the first place.
And that they're not alone.
Hmm.
That there are others out there, there are others like you, because there's also that potentially deep sense of loneliness. Because you're right, the stories are often geared towards the I tried so hard, I tried so hard, I tried so hard, and the miracle happened, right? That's often what we hear. And so, the fact that you are telling your story after all of these years still and shouting from the rooftops, and other people like, Blooming with Care shouting from the rooftops, I think is so, so powerful. And again, not everybody has to do that right off the bat. It's not your job to be an advocate.
I mean, I've lived a pretty public life. Like I was on TV for 30 years. I don't know any other way to be. But even that, for 6 years, I was really quiet about it. Like my closest friends knew and our families knew. But like our families didn't even know until like a few years in. One of the things that I think is missing in the psychology of the fertility experience, as I experienced it, is that you never think it's going to need another cycle. I was like, well, we don't need to tell anybody. We're just going to do the Clomid and then we're going to be fine. Well, we don't need to tell anybody because, like, oh, one round of injectables, God, like, look at me. I'm so fekin' looking, like all of those things. I've never missed a period in my life. We'll be fine. Like all of the things. And you never imagine. You just don't. And so you can isolate yourself because you don't think you need to tell anybody. And I thought that that was a really fascinating thing, even about me, who's pretty out there about my life. I just didn't think I was going to need to tell anybody.
But thank you for sharing.
Oh, yeah.
Truly, I think that you are a role model. Absolutely, for many fertility patients out there. And with the grace that you have, with the confidence that you have, your optimism, and the way that you've built this incredibly full life, you truly are a role model, I'm sure, for many, many patients. And you've touched many, many lives in those chance encounters that you've had at events where people have talked to you. And I do not doubt that for a moment.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. The point was to just make sure that the entire spectrum of fertility experience is represented. That's what was really crucial to me, that the spectrum is represented. And not just in those numbers, but actually with people.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Teri. It was delightful to have you.
Worth the wait, guys. Thank you. We've been dancing around each other for a while, so thank you.
And that's a wrap for today, Superhumans.
If you're looking to connect, get social with us. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at My Fertility Podcast or visit us online at myconfertility.com. And don't forget, follow, subscribe, and share your favorite episode.
Thanks for listening to My Fertility Podcast and for being a vital part of our community. We know you've got this.
We're signing off until next Tuesday.
If you found this episode of My Fertility Podcast helpful, please take a moment to head over to the review section and leave us your thoughts. Your reviews and comments are incredibly valuable to us and help guide future episodes. We also welcome you to direct your questions to info@myfertilitypodcast.com.
My Fertility Podcast is produced by Rabbit Media Inc. in conjunction with Dr. Garcia and Dr. Weiss.
Music by Mixkit. Life is a Dream by Michael Ramirez C.
My Fertility Podcast is not intended to replace any type or variation thereof professional medical, health, or legal advice, nor should the content be taken as medical advice. Please contact your primary healthcare professional regarding any medical questions you may have. The information presented in this podcast is based on the knowledge and understanding of the host at the time of recording. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, and new research may change the understanding of health-related topics. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information, we do not guarantee the completeness, accuracy, or timeliness of the content. The views expressed in this podcast by guests are not those of the host or the management. This podcast is not intended to impose any type of discrimination. My Fertility Podcast and its management are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast.